Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing.
Jeff Hoffman.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
Great. It's great to be here. I very much appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so excited to chat. So, first question, can you tell me about your books?
I would love to. My first book was called Other People's Children, and it was a book about adoption, and it was set in Elmhurst, in the town I live in, and a young couple was adopting a child, and they were waiting for a very long time. They finally adopted the child from a young woman in the area, and they had the child home for about 4 or 5 days before the birth mother decided to reclaim their child or her child. And they, in the couple days that took to unfold, the adoptive parents chose to run, and they headed towards Canada. And then, of course, mayhem ensued, and it became a kind of a Solomonic a tale about a couple and a mother that they both wanted the same child, and there was only one child. So, and then the second book, it's called Like It Never Happened. It's coming out in March 5th of 2024, and it's about 4 18-year-old boys who are best friends, and they get into a fight in a parking lot with two strangers. They kill one, and they incapacitate the other, and then they run. They don't get caught, and over the weeks that follow, they argue about what to do next. And as they argue, their friendship shatters, and they don't see each other for almost 30 years, and they all try to, pretend like it never happened. And the novel opens when one of them, Kevin, dies of a drug-related motorcycle accident, and the other three see each other again for the first time in 30 years at the funeral, and they meet Kevin's wife, and they learn that she's a newspaper reporter, and that she's determined to make him pay, and that she knows everything that happened. And although that death in the parking lot drives the plot forward, the story is really centered on the way in which that long ago night has warped the lives of everyone connected to it. And I think of that killing as kind of like the maypole at the center of it. And it's the family dramas that get wrapped around that maypole and that are the real story. And for me, the book ends up being about, the weight of those secrets and the lies that cover those secrets. And it's about blame. And ultimately, it's about the accountability and redemption. So
That sounds so incredible. Thank you for sharing the plots of both of those books. So,
thank you.
With your more recent one, where did you get that idea? It's such a layered concept, and there's so much to look at, like so many angles that you could have approached this whole thing.
Yeah. So I was in a parking lot when I was 18, and a similar situation, although I didn't get in a fight. But
Is this where you confess?
I'm sorry.
I was saying, is this where you confess to the murder?
No, I luckily I don't, but I do confess to some thinking about this incident a lot, because there's 4 of us and 2 of them, and they didn't leave the parking lot, and we were in our hometown, and a bunch of guys suddenly appeared, and we were not, we were the skinny little wimps, and got pushed to the back, and there was a fight, and people got hurt, and no one got killed, but I spent a long time, the last 30 years to a certain degree, thinking about what could have happened, and that fine line between the things that seem mundane and things that are life altering. And so that's kind of the kernel of the story I started with, and I started writing it at the beginning of COVID during the election, and lies became started to become at the center of the story, and accountability, and all of that was in the ether during that time just kind of leaked into the story. And I knew I didn't want to make it about it's a pretty straightforward story. The 4 men who did something bad a long time ago, right? And for me, again, it's really about how those secrets and lies infected not only the choices they made and the lives they chose, but also affected their families even before that secret was revealed, and just in the way the relationships got infected by it. So that, and I wanted to kind of play with, how did different people deal in different ways, right? These men didn't they didn't interact for 30 years, and they all had to choose how they were going to deal with what they had done and what they were part of. And then I also wrote it from the point of view of the women in their lives. So it's a rotating point of view with 6 main characters, and then the wife of the dead man, and they all are unpacking what happened, and not only what happened, but the suppression of what happened.
Yeah, that is absolutely fascinating. And I think it really brings up the point of how it's like that one moment of trauma, that one night can cause such a ripple effect. And it happens in so many ways in so many people's lives. And we really need stories that highlight how it affects everyone around them, and
That's
how
right.
many years later it can keep coming back.
That's right.
What was your research process like for this book?
I'm going to confess. Here's where I'll confess. I'm not a researcher. I find that research can be a reason to not start writing, and
Mhm.
to put off the writing and put off the story. And so with the research I do is often in the rewrite, and I come back and I make sure that things are accurate, make sure that things make sense, and add some color where it's appropriate. But I also find that doing too much research sometimes allows you it causes you to put things in the story that aren't essential to the story. That you just find these cool facts, these cool places, these cool things that you learn through the research process, and you want to put them somewhere, even though they don't belong. And so one part that I did research a fair amount, though, on this one was one of the, had to choose the careers of each of the individuals, and I wanted all their choices to be affected by that night, right? And 10 years ago, I was at a party, and I asked a friend, or not a friend, but a person that I had met, what they did, and they said, "I'm a tissue broker." And I said, "Oh, do you work for an organ bank?" And like 4 or 5 questions in, I finally got to the point where I was understanding that it was a for-profit tissue broker service, and that kind of stuck in my mind for 10 years. And when I was looking for a career for Henry, I said, tissue broker, what does that mean? And I did some research on the web. I read a book about it, and I found out that there's all kinds of tissue brokers, and one kind of tissue broker actually brokers torsos to medical device companies that are training surgeons, which is just a horrible, macabre, kind of depressing kind of place to be. And I gave that career to Henry, one of the 4 boys that grew up, and tried to work with why he chose that and how that interacted with what he had done and what he was suppressing. And so I had to spend, didn't know much about tissue brokers before I started, so I did spend a fair amount of time sorting through that.
That is so cool. Yeah, that's certainly the kind of thing that sticks in your mind after you
It
hear
does.
about it.
It does.
Yeah, and I love that you did weave that in and kind of thought, how would this impact even something like their career choices, which you wouldn't necessarily assume.
Right.
So
Go ahead.
continue. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say that, I think from a character perspective, I often start with the job that the character has, or if they don't work outside the home, then what is that central place that they come from? What's the thing that's essential to them and unique about them? And then I try to filter the subjectivity of my characters through that. Right. One of them is a lawyer, and everything's about he's a mergers and acquisitions lawyer, and everything's about leverage and negotiation, and these words just pop up in his subjectivity when he's thinking about things. And another is he's a building engineer for a university, and everything's about weight, and everything's about plumb, and everything's about measuring, and the gears grinding against things. And when I find the thing, and one of the characters is Italian, whose mother recently died, and everything the lens that she views everything is through cooking and family, and those connections, those misconnections with her extended family. And once I find that kind of that core piece, that core place, then I can build their world that we can then view the story through.
You answered my question right before I was about to ask it. So, so if that's your first step, what is your second step? Do you just immediately start writing with that in mind, or is there something else that you do in pre-work to build out the character?
Another thing, I'm not the type of person. I write is where I find my characters and where I find my story.
I'm the same way.
I write with a pen on a really cheap notebook, and everything has to happen that way, or else, and the right music needs to be playing and all those kinds of things. But one other thing that's really important for me from a character's perspective is, there's the thing that they want that is tied to the center of the story, right? They want to not be discovered, or they want to discover what the other is hiding, or they want to move towards that place they're journeying towards, or whatever it is. But I always try to find for each of the main characters, what's the thing that they want that has nothing to do with the story. And it doesn't necessarily affect the story so much as it affects my understanding of who they are, right? So I know the lens that they view the world through. I know the thing that they want more than anything out of life, and aside from the plot of the story, and then. From there, I put them in a hard place that's impossible to get out of, and then force them to interact with other characters, and then I find out who they are, right? Until my characters start talking to other characters, I often don't learn who they are. Although there is one exception, the birth mother of. In my first book, she's just a great character, and so many characters are so hard to get to, right? And my first scene, I actually started that book as a short story, and then built it into a novel. And the short story was all from the point of view of the adoptive parents, and so I wrote my first chapter from my birth mother's point of view, and she was in a community college. Her family struggled, and she had a kind of a tough home life, and she had decided to give her baby up for adoption, and she had chose John and Gail for the birth parents. And so she was approaching, and she was in a community college class, Psychology 101, learning about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that thing that you have to learn like 5 times in college. And she was ingesting Maslow's hierarchy of needs and applying it to her own life, and the struggles that she was going through, and the kind of measuring how far she was from some of those levels of Maslow's hierarchy, in her kind of funny, kind of sarcastic way, and then her water broke in the class, and that scene, just without her talking to another character, just talking to herself about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and in this most difficult situation, in this most difficult time in her life, really told me who she was.
Wow. I think that those moments are so important as a writer, when you're kind of having those discovery moments. Do you feel like the
Right.
characters are talking to you in those, or that you're kind of the one pulling the strings saying, now she's going to think about the hierarchy of needs, and here's how it will look, and here's where she'll end up.
I think the way I would say it is that I work I keep on scribbling in the notebook until I'm inhabiting that character, and
Mhm.
then I'm acting as best I can, through my hand and the pen, as that character, and then I'm viewing the world and reacting to what the world sends me as that character, and I try to figure out who they are at the beginning, and then there's the rewriting, right? Sometimes they just fall onto the page, and you're like, that's who Carly is, right? And got lucky there. With John and Gail, I had to write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, and so I finally got them right. And it depends on the character. In this book, Tommy came right off the page. He just landed on the page. He's the building engineer that everybody loves and is guilt racked, and in Malcolm, the mergers and acquisitions lawyer who's just cold and closed up and has closed out his family, for all the reasons. He kind of came right off the page. But then Malcolm's wife, soon to be ex-wife, Elena, it took me a while to find my way into her kitchen and find my way into her family relationships until I finally found her. And then once I did, it flowed from there.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned earlier you have to have a very specific setup when you're writing. And you already said about the pen and the paper, but you mentioned music. What does that look like for you? Like, just let us in on your writing,
Yeah, so
the world around you.
there's not too much. It's a really cheap notebook, so you don't worry about all those pages that you waste. It's got to be a very specific, cheap but very specific pen that flows in a certain way, right? And then I have to be listening to music, but I can't listen to music with words in it. And one thing I found is that I listen to Bella Fleck when I'm trying to drive things forward, right? There's some about the banjo playing and that rhythm and that drive. Moves a new scene, or breaks a new scene open. And then when I'm rewriting, it tends to be jazz and Coltrane and
I was going to ask what jazz, so Coltrane.
Yeah, Coltrane and Monk and all those guys that died before I was born that wrote the best stuff, right, and played the best stuff. But it can't have. It's got to have. I got to have music in my ears, but I can't have words, or else the words don't flow onto the page. So, and that's about it, right? I can write kind of anywhere, given those things. I don't have to have the candles or the lights just right or anything like that. But I need the music and the right pen and the right paper. And then I find that there's something magical about writing it. I've tried writing directly into Microsoft Word, but because it's faster, right? It'd be easier, you would think. And then I find that there's something magical about the tactile nature of writing in a notebook. And then there's less commitment, and you can take risks, and it's just a piece of paper and a pen. It's not in your manuscript yet. And then you do your first level of editing as you're taking it from the paper to the screen. And so you're already getting a rewrite in even before you start. I actually heard one writer speak once. He wrote in pen, and then he typed all the manuscript in, and then he rewrote it in pen, and then he retyped it in again.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, Dan Chuan is the name of that writer, but I don't have that kind of rigor. But I just
I don't
do
think I have the
love
hand strength for that.
right.
So that's really a fascinating method, though. I'm definitely going to be thinking about that for a while.
Right.
So now you've explained how you start writing, like, day to day, but
Mhm.
how did you start writing in general? Were you a kid? Were you an adult? Where did this journey begin for you?
Great question. So I began as a reader. I was a reader for a long time before I became a writer, and I was a reader because my parents decided when I was in second grade that when the TV broke, they decided that we wouldn't get another TV until myself and my brother and sister all got on the honor roll in the same quarter. And it took us 2 years. And so there was nothing to do in St. Louis, where I grew up, in the winter, for instance, except read. And I just became attached to it and loved it. And, I often say, people say, read if you want to write. And I say, don't write unless you already read, right? But then, life took over, and I was a teacher's son, high school teacher's son. So, writing was not an option for a trade, a work. So I became a computer consultant and did some, ran a couple businesses. And in between there, I took a couple years off when I adopted my children, and tried to write a book, and wrote a book that was horrible. But the experience was great, and I loved it. And then went back to work, and 10, 15 years later, when I was 47, I, decided that I always wanted to write a novel, and always isn't going to last. So I quit and went back to school. So I quit my job and treated school as a job, and learned more. And I went to Columbia College Chicago and got an MFA in fiction. And I probably put 50 hours a week into between the class and writing the novel, and I merged with the other people's children as a completed manuscript, and landed an agent about 2 weeks after I graduated. So
Wow.
that was, I fully went into it expecting it to be a wonderful experience that I would always treasure, and hey, let's give it a try, and was lucky enough to land the book deal out of that. So that was
That's
exciting.
amazing. How did that time going back to school influence your writing now?
Going back to school was, first thing, it allowed me to focus, right? I'm kind of all in on what I do at any given time, and I'm not the person that can write an hour before I start work in the morning, and so it allowed me to immerse myself in books and immerse myself in stories and surround myself with people who did the same, and to I could I have written the novel without going to get my MFA? Probably. I think it would have probably taken 5 or 6 years rather than 2.5. And I think that I learned so much from my professors, and I learned so much from the cohort that I was getting feedback from on my writing and from their writing, that it just accelerated the process and allowed me to really immerse myself and study it, right? I'd always read to enjoy reading, and I still do, but now I notice a sentence, I notice a structure, I notice, the part that came from Campbell, and I recognize the choices that the author is making about point of view or character development, or suspense or tension, and that's a whole different level of enjoyment. Not to mention just the sentence level enjoyment that you can get from reading.
Oh, for sure. Kind of to that point, can you shout out some of your favorite books or books that influenced your writing?
So I've read kind of everything Ian McEwan wrote. I think love him as an author. The Children Act was probably the most recent one I read from him. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. The Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I love Jennifer Egan, A Visit from the Goon Squad, especially. I've read that one 2 or 3 times. A new author that I read this year, The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty. And Toni Morrison's just, probably the best there ever was or will be, right? Beloved is a book you can read over and over and find another layer or two every time you read it. And every 4 or 5 years I read a Barbara Kingsolver novel as well. this was a great year to read one of those. Can't recommend Demon Copperfield enough. It was just a fantastic story.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So, okay, I know we've been talking all about novels, but other than novels, what is your favorite form of storytelling?
This sounds kind of silly, but I love telling stories orally too, right? And some of my
I have a
friends and
podcast. I don't think that's silly. You're in the right space for this.
But I find myself stopping at the beginning of a story with somebody that I've known for a while and ask them, have I told this one to you before? But and I love writing short stories too. There's something about the centering on a moment, centering on just an instant in time, and building the story and editing everything extraneous out of that story. That exercises some muscles, but also is, you can see the result of it in a week or two, whereas a novel, for me, it takes a year or two, and that has a different arc of enjoyment, and a different arc of fulfillment.
For sure. Thank you. Yeah, honestly, that was all of the questions I had for you today, but this has been such an incredible interview, and I feel like you've given out fantastic tips and we learned a lot. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed our conversation very much.
I just have one last question, and that's what do you have coming up?
I wrote a draft of a book, and it's a mess, but a glorious mess. I'm really excited about it. I tried to push myself to build more into the book, and it's about one thing I love about it. I wrote this short story that I built this character into it. He's a clerk at a gold buying store, where you go to sell your necklaces when you're desperate, and there's so much that goes on in those stores that on both sides of the counter, that speak to morality and speak to the manipulation and desperation and all that, right? So that's who he is, right? That's not what the story's about. He's divorced. He's divorced, and his ex-wife, who's a wonderful person, but his daughter lives with his ex-wife, and our protagonist is kind of down and out, and he ends up renting the house next to his, without telling her, his ex-wife and her new, somewhat manic and overbearing husband, and then mayhem ensues. And I think the thing I'm excited about is I built so many threads into it that it is a glorious mess, and I'm now working to figure out what it's about. Right? What's at the center of it? What's essential to it? And then that'll allow me to start stripping out, all the extraneous, and press the accelerator on the things that are exciting. So
It sounds absolutely incredible. I cannot wait to read it, and I'm sure I speak for everyone listening to this when I say that.
Thank you so much for having me, Molly. It was truly enjoyable talking to you about this.
Thank you for coming on. This was great. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
I'm Jeff Hoffman.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The
end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast, and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.